refused sister my bedroom. Then parents audaciously tried to remove me from my inherited home. Police escorted them out. Dad dared to break in again, landing him swiftly arrested. If you told me just 5 years ago that I'd be standing in my driveway, property records clutched in one hand, watching police officers cuff the man who raised me, I would have laughed. I would have called you dramatic. But now I know the real drama, the truly gut-wrenching betrayal, is believing that family loyalty can ever stand in for a legal document. People hear inherited house and their eyes just get weird. Like it was easy. Like money just fell into my lap and I just decided to be cold. They don't see the cost. They don't see how grief can be twisted into leverage. How silence can be a weapon. And how entitlement, true entitlement, doesn't always show up screaming at first. Sometimes it shows up smiling, calling you sweetheart, while it steals your space, inch by painful inch. For me, it all started when I was 15. My mom died, and the world just became this muted, underwater place. Every sound felt far away. I remember the sterile smell of the hospital, the way my dad's hands trembled when he signed the papers. I kept thinking she'd call me baby again if I just waited long enough. But I didn't get long. 3 months after the funeral, my dad, Glenn, told me we needed a fresh start. That's what he called it. Like my mother was a stain we could scrub out if we just worked hard enough. And then he introduced me to Carmen like she was a cure. Carmen was 47. Sharp lipstick, sharp voice, even sharper opinions. She hugged me too tightly the first time we met and purred. We're going to be such a happy little family. I smiled because, honestly, I didn't know what else to do. Carmen moved in, and immediately it was like she was staging the house for a showing. The couch moved. Photos started to disappear. My mom's favorite throw blanket, the one that always lived over the armrest, gone. I asked my dad where it went, and he just shrugged, like it was some cosmic mystery. She's just trying to help, he'd say. That sentence became the painful soundtrack of my teenage years. Carmen threw away my mom's clothes without asking. She called it clearing space. She boxed up all my mom's jewelry, claiming it was too painful to keep staring at. She even ripped down my mom's floral curtains and replaced them with stiff, cold gray ones. It was like she was putting the entire house into mourning. But not for my mother. No, it was for the version of us Carmen wanted. Then came the night that snapped something inside me. I was 15. I woke up thirsty and padded to the kitchen. But I froze in the hallway. The glow from my bedroom spilled out like a warning. Carmen was sitting on my bed. My phone was in her hands. And she was scrolling. 2 a.m. She was going through my texts, my photos, even the last voicemails from my mom. The ones I couldn't bear to delete because I still needed to hear her voice when I felt like I was losing my mind. My dad was standing right behind her, barefoot and sleepy, but awake enough to fully understand what was happening. I looked at him, desperately waiting for him to say, "Stop!" He didn't. Carmen didn't even flinch. She just kept scrolling like I was an object she'd purchased and was now inspecting for defects. "You're hiding things," she said. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just felt something inside me go utterly quiet, because that was the moment I realized my dad wasn't going to save me from her. So I called the only person I trusted, my Grandpa Rex. He was my dad's father, a retired judge with a 5-bedroom house and the kind of calm presence that just made you feel like you could breathe again. When I asked if I could move in, he said yes immediately. "Bring whatever you need, Danielle," he told me. "You'll have a room here. You'll have peace." I moved in with a duffel bag and a heart full of bruises. Grandpa Rex didn't pry. He didn't force me to talk. He just made space for the truth to land when I was ready. And when I was ready, he started teaching me. Not lectures, no. These were lessons. He taught me how to read a contract, how property taxes worked, why a signature mattered, why but where family never, ever belonged in a courtroom. "People who rely on guilt," he said once, tapping a folder with 2 fingers, "are usually hiding the part that doesn't benefit them." I didn't realize how prophetic that was until much, much later. When I was 17, Grandpa Rex died suddenly. No long goodbyes, no warnings, just a phone call that made my knees buckle. At the will reading, my dad sat stiff as a board. Carmen held his arm like she was bracing him for impact. Then the lawyer said my name. Everything Rex owned, his house, 2 rental properties, a significant chunk of cash. It was all left to me. My dad got nothing. Carmen's nails dug into my dad's sleeve, so hard, I swear, I thought she'd tear the fabric. My dad's face went crimson. Not grief red, rage red. That's not right, he snapped. I'm his son. The lawyer didn't even blink. The will is clear, she said, and it's legally airtight. Then she played a video Rex had left behind. Grandpa Rex looked straight into the camera, calm as ever, and explained exactly why he did it. He talked about responsibility, about trust, about how he'd watched my dad make choices that always ended with someone else paying the price. My dad's jaw clenched so hard I could literally see the muscle jump in his cheek. When the video ended, he stood up and started yelling about betrayal, about blood, about how Rex had stolen his inheritance. Carmen didn't yell. She just watched me with those cold, calculating eyes, like she was already planning how to get it. And here's the part that still makes my stomach twist. Instead of backing off, my dad and Carmen moved into the inherited house. Not Grandpa's house. My house. They told everyone their place was too small, that it just made sense they'd take care of it while I finished school. I was 17, still technically a minor, still trying to keep my entire world from collapsing. So I agreed, but I set rules. They were not allowed in my bedroom. They were not allowed in Grandpa Rex's office. My room had my personal things, my memories. Grandpa's office had documents, property records, and the last traces of him I couldn't bear to see disturbed. My dad nodded like it was reasonable. Carmen's smile was thin. When I turned 18, I left for college out of state and tried to build a life that didn't revolve around them. And I did. I paid every single tax bill, every repair, every maintenance expense for that house. They lived there rent-free for 9 years. While they played homeowners, I quietly built my own portfolio, one property at a time, using rental income and the discipline Rex had drilled into me. By 22, I owned 6 units. By 24-8, everything worked until last month. I was mid-inspection on one of my rentals when my dad called. I expected a broken water heater, maybe a leaky pipe. Instead, he said, like he was giving instructions to staff, "You need to clean out your room this weekend. We're giving it to Carmen's daughter." I stopped walking so abruptly my heel scraped the concrete. "My room." I repeated. "Yes," he said, impatient. "Becca needs stable housing. She's fighting for custody. Your room is the biggest." My brain snagged on one word. "Who is Becca?" He sounded annoyed that I didn't already know. Carmen's daughter from her first marriage. I felt a cold spread through my chest. In 9 years, Carmen had never mentioned having a daughter. Not once. And now, suddenly this invisible person mattered enough to take my space? 9 years. I said slowly, the words like ice chips in my mouth. "You've lived in my house for free for 9 years, and now you're giving away my bedroom to someone I've never met." My dad's voice sharpened. "Stop being selfish. This is family." I could hear Carmen in the background, whispering like a director feeding lines. I swallowed, my hand shaking. "Do not touch my room," I said, my voice dangerously low. "And do not go into Rex's office. If you do, I will evict you." Silence. Then my dad's tone changed. Lower. Uglier. "You can't evict family. We have rights. We've been here 9 years." "You have the right to find your own place," I shot back. "Don't test me." That's when he dropped the bomb. "We sold our old house years ago," he admitted, the words barely a whisper. "To pay off debt. We don't have anywhere else to go." My stomach flipped. So, this wasn't a request. This was a trap. They had nowhere else. And they were going to make that my problem by taking what was mine, room by room, until there was nothing left of me in my own house. I hung up. That night, I called my lawyer. The next morning, we drove to the house to serve eviction papers the legal way. Clean, official, undeniable. I was a nervous wreck the entire drive, rehearsing what I'd say to my dad's face. I walked up the driveway, stood at my own front door, and slid my key into the lock. It didn't turn. I tried again. Nothing. My lawyer's eyes flicked to mine, and the truth hit me like a physical slap. They changed the locks. My father had locked me out of my own house. I pounded on the door until he finally answered. He didn't open it, though. He spoke through the wood like I was a stranger. "I'm not letting you in," he said, smug and steady, "until you agree to give Becca the room." The last of my doubt evaporated. This wasn't about custody. This wasn't about compassion. This was about control. I turned to my lawyer, my voice flat as ice. "Call the police," I said, and as the distant sirens started to build, I realized my dad had no idea what he'd just done. He didn't just change the locks. He changed the relationship. The sirens got louder as my dad stayed stubbornly silent behind the door. I remember staring at the wood grain, thinking about how many times I'd opened that door without a second thought. How I used to run up those steps as a kid, backpack bouncing, never once wondering if I belonged there. Now I was locked out like a nuisance. My lawyer stood beside me, already pulling property records up on her phone. She didn't look surprised. That almost hurt more than anything, like she'd seen this exact betrayal play out 100 times before. When the police pulled into the driveway, my dad finally opened the door. He looked smaller, not weak, just older, like the years of entitlement had finally started catching up to him all at once. Carmen was behind him, eyes red but alert, clutching her phone like she was ready to record something if it went her way. And sitting on the couch, stiff as a mannequin, was a woman I'd never seen before. Becca. She was mid-30s, maybe, with nervous energy written all over her. She kept checking her phone, fingers twitching like she didn't know what to do with her hands. So, this was the woman who was supposed to take my room. The officer listened calmly as my lawyer explained the situation, showing him the inheritance documents, the deed, the tax records, everything that proved the house belonged to me. My dad crossed his arms, defiant. "We've lived here 9 years, he said. "That has to count for something." "Do you have a lease?" the officer asked. "No," my dad snapped. "We're family." The officer didn't even blink. "Do you have any written agreement that grants you ownership or tenancy rights?" Silence. My dad shifted, then tried again. "My father promised me the house verbally." The officer tilted his head slightly. "Do you have documentation of that promise?" Nothing. Carmen jumped in, voice sharp and dramatic. "This is ridiculous. She's our daughter. You don't involve police in family matters." "No," my dad snapped. "We're family." The officer didn't even blink. "Do you have any written agreement that grants you ownership or tenancy rights?" Silence. My dad shifted, then tried again. "My father promised me the house verbally." The officer tilted his head slightly. "Do you have documentation of that promise?" Nothing. Carmen jumped in, voice sharp and dramatic. "This is ridiculous. She's our daughter. You don't involve police in family matters." The officer turned to her slowly. "Ma'am, this is a property dispute involving illegal lock changes. It's already a police matter." I could see panic flicker in my dad's eyes for the first time. The officer turned back to him. "Who changed the locks?" My dad hesitated, just long enough to incriminate himself. "I don't remember the company," he mumbled. The lie was obvious. The officer sighed. "Sir, changing locks on a property you don't own and denying access to the legal owner is criminal mischief." Carmen's mouth opened, then snapped shut. I watched my father realize too late that his favorite weapon, guilt, didn't work on badges. The officer gave him a choice. Unlock the door and allow me access immediately or be arrested. My dad unlocked the door. As I stepped inside, the house felt wrong. Not damaged, not destroyed, just occupied. like someone else's life had been layered over mine. The couch cushions were different. New throw pillows. A faint floral air freshener that made my stomach twist. It was the same scent Carmen used to spray after throwing away my mom's things. The officer explained the eviction process calmly, firmly. My dad tried every single angle. Nowhere to go. 9 years of living here. Family obligations. The officer just kept asking the same questions. Do you pay rent? No. Do you contribute financially to the property? No. Did you change the locks without permission? Yes. That was it. My dad and Carmen were ordered to start packing. Carmen snapped. She pointed at me, her voice rising, shaking with pure rage. You're really doing this? She shouted. You heartless little girl, hoarding rooms and money while your father has nowhere to go. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. She stepped closer, eyes wild. Your mother would be ashamed of you, she hissed. She didn't raise a selfish landlord. That one landed. Not like she wanted, but it landed. Before I could speak, the officer raised his hand. Ma'am, he said firmly, that's enough. One more outburst, and you'll be removed for obstruction. Carmen froze, her lips pressed tight. The look she gave me could have stripped paint. While they packed, I watched Becca from the doorway. Something about her didn't sit right. She wasn't crying. She wasn't angry. She wasn't even pleading. She just looked uncomfortable, like she'd wandered into the wrong movie and didn't know her lines. I walked over. So, I said casually, how's the custody case going? Becca glanced at Carmen, then back at me. It's complicated. Red flag. How many kids? I asked. Another glance at Carmen. Just one, she said. How old? A pause, too long to ignore. She's 8. A real mother fighting for custody doesn't hesitate like that. They don't need prompts. They talk about their kids like oxygen dates, judges, hearings, school schedules, all burned into memory. Becca looked like she was assembling answers on the fly. Carmen noticed my questions and snapped again. Oh, give it a rest, she barked, stepping between us. You don't get to interrogate her like she's on trial. I held Carmen's gaze. You're right, I said quietly. I don't, but I do get to decide who lives in my house. That shut her up for now. That night, after they left, I walked through the house alone. 9 years of other people living in my space, and suddenly it was silent. I should have felt victorious. Instead, it felt hollow. I went into my bedroom and my breath caught. My clothes were stuffed into black garbage bags. My desk had been pushed aside. The bed frame was gone. They'd already started converting the room. They hadn't just planned to ask. They planned to take. That realization burned away the last traces of doubt. This wasn't impulsive. It was calculated. The next few days were a blur. The locksmith who changed the locks was tracked down within hours. Turns out he hadn't verified ownership. Basic professional negligence. When he realized what he'd done, his voice shook on the phone. He begged me to drop the charges. Talked about his kids, his mortgage, his livelihood. I felt bad for about 10 seconds. Then I remembered standing locked out of my own house while my father smirked through the door. I pressed charges. The licensing board suspended the locksmith. The local news even picked up the story. My dad was charged with criminal mischief and trespassing. At his court appearance, he stood up and gave a speech about ungrateful children and family loyalty. I sat there, hands folded, listening to him blame me for crimes he committed. The judge wasn't impressed. And just when I thought the worst was over, my Uncle Derek called, panicked. He needed to sell his house immediately. Would I be interested? What Derek didn't know was that the house he was desperate to unload was one Grandpa Rex had once told me should never leave the family. I bought it. 40% under market value. All cash. Fast close. I thought your dad was buying the place, he muttered during the closing. Everything clicked. That house had been my dad's plan B. And I just bought it. 3 days after closing, my phone pinged with a security alert. I opened the live feed, and there he was, my father, crawling through a broken window like he belonged there. Wander planning. I called the police again. This time there was no choice. No warnings. No bail. As they let him out, I realized something chilling. My dad didn't see my properties as mine. He saw them as his. And in his mind, I was just the obstacle. Watching my father get arrested the second time didn't feel like shock. It felt like confirmation. Like the universe finally stopped asking me to give him the benefit of the doubt and just showed me the truth in high definition. The officers didn't rush him this time. They already knew his name. They already had the file pulled up before they even reached the front door. He tried to explain, of course he did. "This is my family's house," he said, his voice cracking in that way that used to work on me. "My daughter bought it for me. There's been a misunderstanding." The officers asked him for proof. He had none. No lease, no written permission, no documentation, not even a text message. When they told him the property was legally mine, I watched something in his face just shut down, completely, like a switch flipping off. He didn't argue anymore. He just stared, because this time there was no loophole, no guilt angle, no emotional hostage situation. This time, the court decided there would be no bail. 2 incidents in 2 months. Breaking and entering. Criminal mischief. Prior charges pending. The judge didn't raise his voice. He didn't lecture. He just said no. And that was it. While my dad sat in county, waiting for his next hearing, the rest of the family activated like a hive. Calls started pouring in from relatives I barely recognized. People who hadn't asked how I was doing in years suddenly had very strong opinions about my character. Aunt Susan left me a voicemail about forgiveness and Christian values. Uncle Mike asked if I was really going to let family end up homeless over property. Every conversation followed the same script. I was the villain. My dad was the victim. And somehow the solution always involved me giving up something. Money, housing, peace. While they gave up nothing at all. Not one of them offered to house him. Not one offered money. They just wanted access to my resources, without calling it what it was. I stopped answering. That was when I leaned harder on the one person who never tried to rewrite reality, my boyfriend, Ethan. Ethan wasn't flashy. He didn't give speeches or try to fix me. He just showed up. Late night takeout when I forgot to eat. Sitting on the floor of my empty house while I tried to process what silence actually sounded like. "You're not wrong," he told me one night, like he was stating a fact, not offering comfort. "You're just finally done." I needed that, because while the chaos was loud, the doubts were quieter and far more dangerous. Then, right when things started to stabilize, Ethan's past knocked. His ex-girlfriend, Lana, suddenly resurfaced. At first, it seemed harmless. A text, then another. She framed it as concern. "I heard you've been going through a lot," she said to him. "Just wanted to check in." Ethan showed me the messages immediately. No secrets, no defensiveness. But something felt off. Lana started asking questions that weren't hers to ask. How many properties I owned. Whether my dad was still in jail. If I was really done with my family or just cooling off. At first, I thought maybe I was projecting. Trauma does that. Turns shadows into threats. But then things started lining up. Information I hadn't shared publicly showed up in family conversations. Details about my business schedule, which properties were vacant, who was helping me legally. It felt like someone was peeking over my shoulder. I didn't confront Lana right away. I watched. And while I watched, I started digging. Because if Grandpa Rex taught me anything, it was this. When something feels rushed, someone is desperate. That's when I circled back to Uncle Derek. His sudden panic sale. His rushed departure. The way he wouldn't explain why he needed the money immediately. I started making quiet calls. Old business contacts, mutual acquaintances, people who had seen Derek around town before he vanished. It didn't take long. Derek had borrowed big. 6 figures from the kind of people who don't send polite reminder emails. A real estate flip that crashed hard. Money gone, partners angry, legal threats, pressure, heat. Instead of facing it, Derek panicked. He sold everything he could quietly. Furniture, investments, anything not nailed down. The house was his last escape hatch and I'd bought it. I wasn't his victim. I was his exit strategy. Realizing that didn't make me feel guilty. It made me feel used. But I also wasn't naive enough to pretend I'd lost in that deal. I'd bought a solid property far under market value. Derek's mess wasn't my responsibility. And then while my dad was still locked up, something else finally cracked. Carmen reached out. Not screaming. Not accusing. Begging. She caught me outside the courthouse one afternoon, looking like she hadn't slept in weeks. "Danielle," she said, grabbing my arm. "Please, there's things you don't know." We sat in my car. She unraveled fast. The custody story? It was a lie. Not completely fabricated, but twisted so badly it barely resembled the truth. Becca wasn't fighting to regain custody. She was fighting to keep visitation. The court wasn't reunifying her with her daughter. It was considering terminating her parental rights entirely due to neglect and substance abuse. Carmen had exaggerated. No. She weaponized the story to make me feel morally cornered. She thought if I believed some desperate mother was on the verge of losing her child, I'd cave. I stared at the steering wheel, my hands numb. They didn't just lie. They used the idea of a child being taken from her mother to manipulate me. That kind of manipulation doesn't come from panic. It comes from practice. Why not just tell me the truth? I asked quietly. Carmen didn't answer. She didn't need to. She asked if they could move into one of my rental units when my dad got out. Promised rent. Promised peace. Promised they'd changed. I told her all my units were occupied. That wasn't true, but the lie felt cleaner than the truth. Then my dad got released. 2 days later, he showed up at my workplace. He stormed into the lobby, yelling about stolen inheritance and ungrateful children, demanding to see me. Security rushed in. Clients stared. My assistant looked terrified. When the police arrived, they arrested him for violating the restraining order I'd quietly filed the day before. Watching my father get handcuffed in my office lobby didn't hurt the way I thought it would. It embarrassed me, not because of what people thought of me, but because he'd chosen spectacle over accountability one last time. That was the moment I hardened everything. I moved my properties into an LLC, changed my number, gave tenants his photo with instructions not to engage. I stopped responding to family messages altogether. And then, in the quiet that followed, I went back into Grandpa Rex's office, the room I'd protected for years. I finally opened the locked drawer I'd avoided. Inside was a letter, written to Rex's lawyer, explaining everything. The debts my dad never repaid. The money Derek stole when he worked for him years ago. The disappointment. The lack of trust. The reason he chose me. Reading it didn't make me angry. It made me peaceful. Because it confirmed what I'd already lived. I wasn't cruel. I was prepared. And the people who hated that the most were the ones who benefited from me not being. After that, everything felt quiet. Not peaceful at first, just empty. The kind of silence that comes after something finally stops fighting back. My dad ended up in a studio apartment across town. 55 years old, working retail, criminal record, credit wrecked. Still telling anyone who'd listen that his daughter stole his life. Carmen divorced him while he was still dealing with court dates. She sent me a long message apologizing, explaining, rewriting history in softer words. I blocked her halfway through. Becca disappeared the moment the free housing fantasy collapsed. No more custody story. No more emergency. Just gone. Uncle Derek tried reaching out a month later. A vague message. Hope you're well. Would love to talk. I blocked him too. Ethan cut off Lana when it became clear she'd been fishing for information and feeding pieces of my life back to people who didn't deserve access. No drama. No back and forth. Just a boundary, clean and final. That mattered to me more than any apology ever could. A few weeks later, I closed on my 9th property. A duplex in a neighborhood just starting to turn. Strong numbers, clean tenants, solid future. Sometimes people still look at me funny when they hear the story. They hear, she called the police on her own father, and their faces tighten like they've already made up their minds. I let them, because they didn't see my clothes in garbage bags. They didn't hear my bedroom being reassigned like I was already gone. They weren't locked out of their own house and told compliance was the price of entry. This Thanksgiving, Ethan and I hosted dinner at my place. A few friends. No speeches. No tension. No one asking for anything they hadn't earned. At one point, I stood in the kitchen, watching people laugh around a table I paid for in a house I protected, with a life I built, carefully on purpose. And I thought about Grandpa Rex, how he used to say, the hardest boundaries are the ones that save you. He was right. I didn't win because I was ruthless. I won because I stopped letting guilt pretend it was love.